My name is Byron Anklade. I'm a third-generation oyster fisherman from East Point, Lahash, Louisiana. Point Lahash is a small fishing village in Plaquemine Parish, Louisiana, with approximately 300 people. It is primarily an African-American community, with seafood being its primary industry. We need your help. This oil spill will be devastating for Plaquemine Parish, but it will be extremely difficult for fishermen who depend on this livelihood as a source of income and food source.
That was a look at the new documentary, Vanishing Pearls, which captivates and captures the devastation, heartbreak, and broken promises that came in the wake of the BP oil spill in the Gulf.
The disaster may have happened 4 years ago this month, but this film shows us how people near the disaster zone are being negatively affected to this day. Here with us with more is the director of Vanishing Pearls, Nailah Jefferson. Nailah, nice to meet you and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, this story is sort of like a David and Goliath struggle to survive as an oyster fisherman after the BP oil spill. Tell us a little bit more about what we'll see in this documentary.
Absolutely. Well, the film is about the community of Point Lahash, Louisiana. It's a community of about 300 African-American fishermen. And in the wake of the BP spill, this community was really thriving. This was the place where you would go down, and they had the most plentiful oysters down there, oyster harvests down there. But since the spill, their harvests have gone down 71%. So that's showing you that both economic and ecological recovery have not occurred since the spill.
How did you become aware of this community and their journey, and what made you want to put it on film?
Well, I'm actually from New Orleans, and that's just 55 miles away from Point Lahash. And I always loved the seafood. I always would talk about how unique my city was, but I never knew about these communities that really poured so much into the city that I love. And so once I found out, once I became educated about these family businesses that have lived along the Gulf Coast for years and years, I just knew it was a story that I had to tell.
Well, you know, a lot of people look, especially not being down there, they see these commercials on TV. BP is saying they've cleaned up the oil, everything's back to normal, but your documentary says that's not the case.
Absolutely, it's not the case. They are still picking up oil on beaches, along marshes in Louisiana. And like I said, fishing in the Lake Pontchartrain Basin where these fishermen harvest their oysters is down 71% since the spill. So that's not recovery.
Yeah, the truth is it's going to be generations before that's clean. I mean,
Absolutely.
the Exxon Valdez oil spill was 20-some years ago, and there's still oil there. Now, of course, BP pledged a lot of money, $20 million in recompense to those fishermen who were affected by this. Have they seen this money?
Well, some fishermen have, but what BP did was they put out a 2-year recovery prediction, and so they paid people along those lines. Many fishermen got $5,000, many fishermen got $25,000. So the problem here is that they've been undercompensated, and that was about 50% of the fishing industry. There's a new settlement process now. However, BP is working really hard to slow down that process. It's a court system. It's through the court system, but they are putting in appeal after appeal to try and not pay out these claims.
And I think one of the things that people don't understand is that because the oil went down to the bottom, and that's where they get these oysters from, these people who have been fishing these waters for generations are no longer able to work. How has that impacted the livelihood of the people around that community?
It's absolutely devastated many. A lot of these fishermen dropped out of school in the 8th grade, the 6th grade, just so they could dedicate themselves to fishing. So for these men who are now in their 50s and 60s, they know no other way of life. And they really are lost. They're at a loss. They don't know where to go.
And the other thing is, you know, we hear about, even in the documentary, people saying they were homeless. And the fact is, a lot of them, especially the man who you follow, Byron, he employs his whole entire family. So it's not like he can go to someone else's house if he loses his home, because everybody's going to lose their home.
Yes, and his story is very emotional. Now he's dependent on his daughters, his son-in-law, to get by, and you can see their reaction. They cry at the thought of someone who really took care of them their whole lives, and now they're having to take care of him. And they see that their father just kind of the downfall, the decline of his business and their family legacy.
Nailah, as I understand it, Maxine Waters,
yes,
Congresswoman, has been very supportive of you, but why haven't more politicians stepped in?
Well, I think the unfortunate thing with Louisiana politicians is they're so reliant on oil and gas. The state is so reliant on oil and gas, and so that's a relationship that they don't want to put in jeopardy, and even if that means risking the fate of this community.
As you delved more and more into this story and learned about actually what went on that led to this, how has it changed your perspective about big oil, about business and our environment?
It's very disappointing. I think I always just respected the environment just because I think as something that God created, we should just respect it as human beings. But now that I see these people for centuries and centuries have relied on the lands, relied on the waters for sustenance, you know, it just shows me how important it is and how it's something that we really need to treasure. And we need to educate people that this way of life is one that's worth saving.
Well, how are we able to help these fishermen at this point? What can be done? Because even if they do further cleaning, it's still going to take many years for those oysters to, you know, come back to where we can eat them, right?
Right. I think we need to stand up to our federal government and to those in our local government in Louisiana and tell them that they need to push BP to compensate these people fairly. $5,000, $25,000 is not enough for these people who absolutely lost their livelihoods.
I know that this is a story that a lot of people just don't know about. When they hear about these stories, what's the reaction that you get?
We talk about this in the film. A lot of people are surprised that there are black fishermen.
Right.
And I have to say, I didn't even realize that this community existed. So that's the first thing. And then secondly, I think there's disappointment and sometimes a bit of kind of shame that people have been really tricked by BP in a way, tricked into believing that the oil has been cleaned up and that people have been treated fairly, and they have not.
Well, these are not only black fishermen, these are black entrepreneurs. They had thriving businesses. Tell us a little bit about that community. There's only 300 people there.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about the community and what life was like before this disaster.
Well, this is a community. They started off as sharecroppers. And so they really built themselves up to become independent fishermen. They started off with small boats, and then they moved along to bigger boats, bigger business, and that's where they were when the spill occurred. And so now to see that this once thriving business has been really just wiped out in a flash, in moments. It's a really sad reality.
Did you reach out to BP at all? And have you gotten any sort of reaction or response from them?
Well, I reached out to BP, Transocean and Halliburton, actually, to participate in the documentary. And Halliburton is the only company that responded, and they said, no, you know, we're in litigation, we can't respond. BP, Transocean, I didn't hear any response. And to be honest, I don't really expect to.
Wow. Well, has any laws been put in place to make sure an explosion like this doesn't happen again? Or are there any hopes for laws to be put in place?
Well, there have been tighter regulation as far as oil and gas drilling. I think we do need to have more regulation as far as what to do when a spill occurs because, you know, we're drilling. It's going to happen. But we need to be able to plug a spill quicker. This went on for 87 days. And then a lot of the measures that they took to clean up the oil exacerbated the issue. The problem, I think, with the oysters in Louisiana is that a lot of that oil sunk down to the bottom because of the use of dispersants. And so that's something that we need to make sure it never happens again.
Yeah, that should be the mantra in this case, never, never again.
Never again.
Now, is it right that you worked with Ava DuVernay? Yeah, what was it like to work with her?
Well, I just started working with Ava. Her company, Affirm, is distributing the film. And so it's really been, it's an amazing process to see this woman who came from being a publicist to being a director and really just took control of her career through distribution. I've always wanted to work with women. I hadn't had the chance on this film, so I'm glad that I'm with a company that's really, that's run by an African-American woman and she's making things happen. This is the most powerful role you can play in the film business if you have the ability to get a film out there.
Well, what do you hope people get out of your film? What should they walk away with?
Well, I hope they know that there's this community of fishermen who have fought long and hard to build their business, to be independent, and they're continuing to fight hard to sustain this way of life that they have down there.
When and where can people see Vanishing Pearls?
Well, Vanishing Pearls will premiere April 18th in New York and LA. So you can go to affirm.com for exact locations and times, and I hope everyone comes out to see it.
And we hope after that it'll spread to the rest of the country.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You're watching Arise Entertainment 360.